Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Geezerology. Today, Bill and I are going to talk about an album that was released 40 years ago that is close to both of our hearts. We're both big fans of this one. This is The Days of Wine and Roses by the Dream Syndicate. This was the first time we heard from Steve Wynn, who has been around ever since then in one form or another, doing some pretty good alternate indie rock, with the Baseball Project as a solo artist. The Dream Syndicate is back now as a going band once again after a 3-decade layoff. Well, this is their debut album, The Days of Wine and Roses. Steve Wynn, Carl Percoda on lead guitar, Kendra Smith on bass, and Dennis Duck. I didn't say it. I knew I was going to say it. Dennis Duck on drums. And Bill's going to start us off with our discussion of The Days of Wine and Roses.
Yes, you're right, Scott. This is a record I really liked, and I was really amped up for it before I even heard it because I happened to be in the Air Force. I was in Germany, and I used to subscribe to a number of different music magazines, which is how I got my information. And one of them was Slash. It was based in Los Angeles. It was a newspaper, essentially. I guess we'd call it a fanzine if they still had those things these days. And it covered kind of the scene, in general, kind of the underground rock scene, but specifically in California. And they started talking in late 1982 about this outfit called the Dream Syndicate. And I was intrigued by the name, which sounded really cool. And the sound that was being described, because they were still, kind of a group in gestation, sounded very intriguing. A lot of psychedelic feedback drenched kind of tunage. Sounded very interesting to me. And the record itself, when it came out, I was still in Germany, but I came back to the States in the first part of 1983. The record was on the Slash label, which was the arm of the newspaper, and it was produced by Chris D, who was Chris Desjardins, who quite a well-known guy in the music journalism field, but also a musician on his own. And he was a writer on Slash. He produced the record in the same kind of style of the music that he actually was producing himself with his own band, the Flesh Eaters. And what was really exciting about this was that all of what I had heard about was what I actually discovered when I actually got my hands on the record. I was in Oklahoma, and it took me a while to get this record because I had to go to the record store in Enid, Oklahoma, and ask the guy to order the record, and he did. And he said, "You're the only guy who's ever asked for something from that label." And
I'm laughing because I spent some time in Oklahoma, and I know where Enid is. I know exactly. And back in the early 1980s, I know exactly what it was like trying to find a piece of music.
It was kind of crazy.
80s, yeah,
crazy. But the record store did exist, and they were pretty good. I mean, they had to cater to the audience, which was not necessarily beating down the doors for this kind of stuff. But I got it. I took it home. I played it, and I couldn't believe it. It was fantastic. It was so aligned to what I was hoping for, and even kind of exceeded. You can imagine this kind of combination of the Velvet Underground and television and all kinds of other noisy things, good stuff from like the psychedelic 60s. So, like the Nuggets, a double album with all of those kind of crazy LSD drenched singles, except these guys sounded, pretty straightforward. And Steve Wynn, who you mentioned, I immediately was captivated by his whole approach to this, because he's kind of got a weird take, in his songs are they sound like they're pretty straightforward, but they're not. They don't seem to make a lot of sense. The more you think about it, the less sense they make. But they don't come across that way. And it doesn't really matter anyway, because the guitars are so loud and noisy. And Carl Percoda in particular is a great guitarist, and he creates this sound that you kind of get lost in. I loved it. What happened to you? How did you find this
Well,
thing?
I actually, it was a few years after this came out when I discovered it. It was it was probably 5 years later, 86 or 87, and I was in Springfield, Missouri then, and a guy who I worked with, uh, he used to he would talk about bands all the time. He was a big REM fan. That was REM was his number one, and but he would talk about all these bands I'd never heard of. And so I said to him, that guy's name was Steve Yates, and I said, Steve, do me a favor. I bought a couple of empty of blank cassette tapes, right? I gave it to him. I said, so if you got some time, just some of the stuff you're talking about, I said, do a mixtape for me. Show me some stuff. And if you and a little while later, a week or so later, he came back with a couple of cassette tapes with I don't know 5 or 6 albums copied on them, and 2 of them were The Days of Wine and Roses, and then the next one, The Medicine Show. And I listened to these things and I said, man, this kid knows what he's talking about. This is great stuff. I eventually ended up buying the CD. It took a while because it was a long time before these things were released on CD. So I mean, they weren't available. And by this time, I moved away from vinyl and was heavily into the CD world. So it did actually take me a while to find it. But I wore the hell out of that cassette tape that the guy gave me. That he dubbed from. I don't know whether he dubbed it from a CD or vinyl. I'm not sure. But that's how I got onto it, and I just loved it. Um, I I love Steve Wynn's voice. I don't I'm not one who really gets dives deep into the lyrics of a song or what the message of a song or anything like that. But uh, but particular lines in a lyric will sometimes jump out at me and get in my head, and this thing is just full of just succinct, clever word lines and wordplay that with the way he says some of the things he said. You sit there and think about it. What does that mean? And then you think about it, and you kind of figure out exactly what he's saying there. Go, wow, that was a clever way to work that into a song lyric, and work into the rhythm of the song. Um, there was a lot of that. Uh, but what I really loved about this album, what got me, and I mean, we've heard some of this. This is early on in the sort of the good, really heavy guitar based alt rock, indie rock movement. This really predated all that movement. But
Mhm.
I think this is kind of the genesis of that, where the stuff that came along several years later. Uh, it kind of this is kind of the beginning of some of that. What I'm saying
Yeah,
about that, what I'm saying about that is what I really loved was that these were really tight, uh, catchy, uh, I would say power pop songs. I mean they're just nice tight songs, and then you've got this Steve Wynn. I love his voice. His voice is not a classic voice. It's sort of a monotony, Lou Reedy, Dylan sort of just a monotony, sing-songy voice. It's not completely tonal. He doesn't hit some notes and things like that, and it's a lot of monotone. But the way he uses it on this stuff, it just really got under my skin. But more than anything else is that these tight little songs with this pretty cool singer on top of it, and then all of a sudden you just got this chaos thrown on top of it with Carl Percoda's guitar. I mean, he's just all over the place with his lead guitar. There's feedback going on. There's just all kinds of distortion and everything, and it's just layered on top of these just tight, nice songs. And I'd never heard anything like this before, and I just loved it.
Yeah, I think it's for people who have that you mentioned Dylan and Reed as kind of similar sort of in the way they can approach a song and in their vocal stylings. I think Steve is a lot more tolerable, for people who take some of that stuff, like I have some friends who like cannot listen to Bob Dylan because they don't like the sound of his voice. It's just repelling their ability to appreciate it. It doesn't matter. They can't get past it. But I think with Steve, it's almost like he's having a conversation. I mean, it's kind of a sing-songy sort of thing, but as you said, it's kind of wrapped up in this very powerful combination of melody plus noise, and so the noise is in service of the song. And when they start to stretch out, there's a couple of songs that are like 6 minutes long. They kind of really can make things happen, but they can do the other thing too, which is kind of really compress something and have all of that stuff happening in a real brief period of time. It's even more powerful sometimes. So it's great. I mean, the band is really good. We mentioned Percoda. Kendra Smith is the bass player, and she actually sings one of the songs, "Too Little, Too Late," which is I mean, she does a great. She hardly ever sang. I think that was her one song until many years later, where she did a song with the.
Well, this is the only album that she recorded with them as a member of the band. She left the band after this.
Right. So this is, to me, this is the classic Dream Syndicate lineup. And if when people mention the band and they talk about the Days of Wine and Roses, this is the kind of outfit they're talking about. And we'll at some point we'll talk about some of the other stuff in their catalog. Material.
You and I are going to do. We're going to rank. They have 8 studio albums, 4 of them in the '80s, and then 4 of them in the past 10 years. And we're going to mass them all together and rank them. So we'll go more in depth about what they did later during that video, right?
Right, but anybody who wants to start with this outfit, this is where you start. And as far as kind of the potency of the package, this is really all about it. The other thing is, we didn't mention that they kind of got lumped in with this whole Paisley Underground. It was kind of the
I've never understood what that was. I've always heard that, and the only thing I can figure out is a bunch of bands that came out of the clubs in California that made them the Paisley Underground. I mean, there doesn't seem to me to be any sort of signature sound or signature approach or anything like that with what they call the Paisley Underground. I've never understood that label.
No, it only makes sense, and it doesn't make a lot of sense even then, if you consider the fact that some of the bands like Green on Red and some of their contemporaries really took.
They say the Bangles. I've heard the Bangles put into this.
Yeah, so maybe they have a kind of a '60s component and a certain type of '60s. Think like Rubber Soul, Revolver, Beatles.
Yeah,
I mean, so it's very specific. So it's not like the the late period hippie stuff. It's more like the garage band becoming psychedelic sort of thing.
That's a good description. Garage band meets
it's a little
meets acid heads, right?
Yeah, you take a trip, right?
Yeah. This is fabulous. And one thing I will say here to lead up to their future is that people have been pretty much waiting for 40 years for them to do the Days of Wine and Roses Part 2, and they never did. This is a band that they never did the same thing twice in a row. It does well. We'll get into that a little more in depth later. But actually, they reformed 10 years ago in 2012. Duck and Steve Wynn put the band back together to do a 30th anniversary of the Days of Wine and Roses. And then when they did that, they got together and they decided that they felt like they were a pretty good band. So now they became an actual viable unit again. And their stage show now, as far as I can tell, their stage show now is essentially, you know, the Days of Wine and Roses, Medicine Show, some of their 80s stuff. But they go in the studio and they do something completely different, which we'll talk about on our next on our next video of them. Yeah, I cannot say enough good things about this record. It's a perfect record. There is nothing absolutely. There's no misstep anywhere on this record, I don't think.
No, I agree. Yeah, you don't want to. There are no songs to skip. I mean, there's no fat.
You put it on track one, and you don't let up until the last. You know, and they get into that little. Steve Wynn has talked about. He has referred to this as the Dream Syndicate's Velvet Underground album. You know, I mean, they were listening to the Velvet Underground while they were making this record. And there's, you know, it's pretty obvious. It's pretty obvious. And one thing though, the title song, which is the closing song on the album, is 7 minutes and 22 seconds, and probably the last 1/3 of that album is that classic Velvet Underground, you know, Lou Reed, John Cale, just repetition, just the same guitar chord, jamming the same guitar chords just over and over and over again, just taking you out, and it's just fabulous.
I listened to it on headphones for the first time in a long time, a couple of times recently, and it's even better that way, unless you can turn it up really loud. But the neighbors might not like that.
That's right. It's really tuneful. It's really catchy. It's really chaotic, and it's really noisy. You know, Think of everything you liked about guitar-based bands in the '80s and in the '90s, and there's a little taste of all of that thrown in here, and it's all done very, very well.
Play it loud, and get back to
play it loud. Be proud. Play it loud. Right. You will love it. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, and look us up in a couple of weeks. We'll have a ranking of the Dream Syndicate's discography. We have a few other things coming up, so hit that subscribe button and keep checking in on us. We'll talk to you later. So long.
I didn't warn you. 2 steps forward, and I didn't